Hello and welcome back to the Caledonian YouTube channel. To everyone who subscribed between last week and this week, thanks very much. It's really good to see so many people subscribing as we try and build a channel of kind of free content for ADIs and PDIs. We've got loads of good videos lined up for the next kind of few weeks and into kind of over Christmas. And things like we're going to be reviewing CPD courses and some of the CPD suppliers. We're going to be carrying out some interviews with some well-known leading figures in the industry, and we'll do some coaching tips on coaching, client-centered learning videos, and book reviews, of which this is the first. So I'm really pleased to be talking to you about The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim Gallwey. This is one of the first books that I read about coaching. Probably about 7 or 8 years ago now. It was written in 1974, and Tim Gallwey, the author, is pretty much considered as one of the founding fathers of the coaching and client-centered learning movement, along with Sir John Whitmore. And after he wrote this book, he went on to kind of develop leadership programs, coaching and training programs in sport, but also in the world of business and education as well. The Inner Game website is one of the best places on the internet for resources. There are loads of kind of copycat books within the series. There's actually a series of Inner Game books from Tim Gallwey. Inner Game of Stress, Inner Game of Golf, Inner Game of Management, these kind of things. So yeah, it's really good. It's sold over 2 million copies worldwide since 1974. And as I say, it's a good read for anyone who is new to coaching, or anyone who is looking to delve a little bit deeper into coaching and trying to kind of bring it into their training processes. So I want to run through just maybe 3 or 4 of the main principles, the main takeaways or premises that I took from the book. As I say, I read it about 7 or 8 years ago, and I reread it this week to kind of refresh it in my mind for this video. And what I've discovered is there's stories in here and kind of lines that I have remembered and that I use in my training to this day, and I'll tell you what those are as we go through it. But that kind of reinforced in my mind how important it was to do this video, that how much of an effect this book had on my training. So I'm sure some people out there will find it useful. So the first premise that it talks about, kind of first 2 chapters probably, is the 2 selves. So the idea behind this is that we'll start with the second self. The second self is the part of your being that does things. So in tennis, the second self is the one that moves your feet, watches the ball, moves the racket back, and attempts to hit the ball at a certain time. Self 1 is the talking self. So the self 1 is the one that reacts or talks to you after the fact. It talks to you other times as well, but for the purposes of making this point, it's the one that has the reaction to the shot. So if you ever watched a game of tennis and you see players hitting a shot and kind of having to G themselves up or giving themselves a hard time, you're like, come on, move your feet. Andy Murray's quite good at it, or bad for it, depending on your take. Move your feet or hit the ball, or get faster, these kind of things. This is self 1, talking to self 2 and trying to tell self 2 what to do different the next time around. Now, the premise of Tim Gallwey's premise here is that is not always a good thing. And what can happen is that self 1 can force self 2 to overcompensate and actually make things worse. The example he gives, one of the examples he gives, is that if the tennis player hits a shot into the net, for example, and the reaction of self 1 is, come on, that's terrible, hit it higher, then what self 1 forces self 2 to do with that response is to try harder, to put more physical effort in. And by putting more physical effort in, what actually happens is that the body gets more tense, and muscles tense that shouldn't be tensing in the body. And as a result of that, the next time that shot comes in and the body kind of primes itself, it focuses and tenses, it overhits the shot and the ball goes out of court. And Tim Gallwey claims that happens all the time in tennis. It's a response that he sees when self one gets in the way of self two. As I say, self one is the talking self, the one that passes judgment, which we'll come on to shortly, and self two is doing. And every time self one shouts a little bit too loud, it gets in the way of self two doing and just learning from what has happened and self-adjusting. So keep that in mind. We'll come back to that as we work through this kind of idea. Now, something that leads on from this is the idea of what is self one doing when it does this. And one of the things it's doing is having an emotional response to what it's just seen, to what has just happened. And in coaching, we know that emotions play a really, really important part. Negative, positive, in a positive way. You can have them in a positive way in terms of emotional reactions to success, for example. But emotional responses to when things do not go well are not helpful. Even in sport, when you see all these top professional players, and when they let their emotional reactions get on top of them, self-too can sometimes suffer. You see it all the time in kind of match play and tournaments. And I think we see that sometimes in driving. I think that we can watch a learner driver who's maybe having a tough time with some kind of physical aspect of driving, like finding a biting point, for example. And we have seen it time and time again that a learner driver is maybe bringing the clutch up too fast, just at the last bit. And we can see them physically trying harder, and the knuckles getting a little bit white on the steering wheel, and the shoulders maybe coming up a little bit, and maybe the temperature's raising a little bit in the car, it's getting a little bit warm. These are manifestations of self one giving self two a hard time for getting it wrong, and the body overreacting but overcompensating. And I've seen it loads of times that maybe the next stall is even worse than the first stalls, or it overcompensates and we're nowhere near the biting point. So the judgment, the emotional response of self one is one of the things that can be really detrimental to the body's attempt at getting something right. And Tim Gallwey gives a really good analogy here. He talks about imagining a tennis match. So kind of player one and player two. So imagine that player one hits a shot and that shot hits the net and he's annoyed by that. So player one's self one says to itself, that's terrible. So he's placing an emotional response on that, a judgment on that shot. Player two though is on the other side of the net. I'll go this way. Player two is on the other side of the net. And he sees the same shot, but he places a judgment on it that it is good because it's good for him. It's the exact same shot, but both players have judged it differently. And the important thing to note in this analogy is that umpires kind of view the shot. To him, the shot is neither good nor bad. It's just out, or it's just hit the net. And the umpire focuses on the fact of the matter, and the emotional label that is attached to it by these two players is completely irrelevant. So I found that really interesting. It goes on to take that further and encourage coaches to encourage their clients to try and detach themselves from these emotional responses, because it is the most effective way of quietening down self one, because self one is what gets in the way of self two just getting on with fixing what has gone wrong. And that premise leads us into kind of the final premise that I took from the book, which was probably the biggest thing I took from the book, and that is that we are in possession of this incredible tool, which is our body, and the body's natural ability to learn is something that we take for granted every day of our lives. And the final analogy that I'll give you from the book is one that I use very, very, probably every person I've trained in the past 8 years, I've used this analogy with when I'm trying to get them into coaching, and that is that when nobody trains a toddler or a baby to walk through verbal instruction or full talk through, we just don't do it. Toddlers and babies learn to walk, it's probably just as well. Toddlers and babies learn to walk through watching, visual image, copying, but also trial and error. Watching the parents walk, watching things on television at a young age, and then trial and error, trying to stand up, testing the strength of the legs, testing how much they need to bend their knees, how much they need to straighten their back by to avoid toppling over, where they need to position their arms for the best kind of balance. And if they do fall over, there's no judgment by the parents placed on that. It's not a good or a bad attempt at walking. The parent's job is actually very close to that of what a good coach should be. The parent supports and facilitates another attempt at the walking. And I think that's just such a good analogy for coaching and understanding learning and how people learn. Really good when you get into doing learning styles in coaching as well, to keep this kind of analogy in mind. The final thing on that analogy is that in terms of the differences between talking and visual imagery, one of the reasons we don't talk and tell toddlers how to walk is that they don't understand language fully yet. So we know from that the body's natural language, if you like, is not verbal. The body's natural way of learning is visual. It's copying and trial and error as well. It's just trying things. So that's a really good one to keep in mind. That's kind of the three premises. So to summarise, we have the two selves. Self one, which is a tendency to try and tell self two what to do, then it can sometimes do more harm than good. The dangers of attaching emotional responses to things that we've done, attempts at new skills, is not really a good thing. We should try and kind of detach ourselves from negative responses and just look at something in the cold, hard light of day for what it is. Was it too much or was it too little? How can I adjust it the next time and keep self one quiet? And finally, the body's natural ability to learn from mistakes and by watching things and copying things. Those are the three things that I think are the most important principles in this book. What's not good about the book? The book was written in 1974, as I said. There are a couple of things in here that are a little bit close to the bone. There's one analogy about a woman walking down the road with no clothes on. I'm not going to bore you with it. It's not offensive. I just don't think it's something that would get past a publisher today, possibly. In another area, he is telling a story about one of his clients and he refers to her as an attractive housewife. These kind of things that are, you could maybe say that it's of its time. It kind of makes you feel a wee bit uncomfortable reading it, but I don't think it takes away from the overall value of the book. It's just something to keep in mind as you're going through it, that it is these kind of 1974isms are in there. There's only a couple. What else is not good about it? It's about tennis. If you hate tennis, this is not the book for you. But I think it's important that you if you're going to give it a shot, try and get past the tennis. It goes into tennis in a lot of detail in some places. You kind of get to know the bits that you can skip to kind of get back to the training and the self-development and the kind of forming of good habits and breaking habits kind of element, which is more relevant to our industry and coaching in general. In short, it is a fantastic introduction to coaching and client-centered learning. It's a really good critique on sometimes the way that coaches and instructors can sometimes impede learning and the way that we do more harm than good. That's one of the other things that I took away from it, as Tim Gallwey is telling you these stories about his own mistakes as a coach, and it's really kind of refreshing to see a coach or a trainer talk about these things up front. and present them for our benefit. It's a good thing. So I think that's all. It's really good, as I say. I will pop a link if you want to buy this underneath the video, and you can tell me what you think in the comments. If you have read it, please give me some feedback. If you have enjoyed this, please give the video a like. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. That just gives us some encouragement that we're doing the right thing here. And you can click the bell icon, and that will give you a notification of any new content that we put up over the next few weeks. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate your time. Have a good day.